everybody, and welcome back to U University. I'm Dr. Kelly. How are you? This is my first ancillary video. You probably remember that a few weeks ago I changed the format of my videos and decided to split them up so that my regular videos will focus on the classroom segment that is related to knitting or the fiber arts in general. And then sometimes I'll record ancillary videos, which are just extra ones where I talk about other topics. And these ancillaries might be more chatty, more personal, and less formal. And I might talk about arbitrary topics that don't necessarily have to do with knitting, like book reviews or other things. So you can choose to watch the ones that you find interesting, whether you want to watch my regular videos, the ancillaries, or both. So what's been going on with me? Well, today I did my hair a little differently. I'm kind of testing it out to see how I like it. I thought I would switch things up a little bit for summer. This past week was finals, and all my classes handed in papers, so I had a lot of reading and grading to do. But I'm all done, and grades have been submitted, so now I have a few weeks break before my summer class starts. And that's just in time because we're finally having some beautiful spring weather. It is hard to believe that a month ago we had a snowstorm and 5 inches of snow. And now the lilac bushes are in full bloom and the scent of freshly mowed grass is in the air. The farmers have been planting in the fields and we have little corn plants sprouting all over the countryside. Everyone in our neighborhood is planting their vegetable gardens and flowers, and a cute little sparrow couple has built a nest in the birdhouse on our front porch. So yeah, it has turned into a beautiful spring. I want to thank everybody who has sent me a card or letter recently. It's been so nice hearing from you. I love getting snail mail. And if you want to write to me, my address is listed in the information box below. And if you send me a card or a letter, I'll write you back. Sometimes it might take a while, but I will write. Okay, so for today's video, I thought it would be fun to do a Q&A about my book reading. So what I did was I looked up a bunch of questions that book reviewers use for different tags here on YouTube. And I compiled a list of questions that I'll give you my answers to. So the first question is, when did you get into reading? Well, I remember when I was little, I could not wait to learn how to read. And when I finally did get to read, I picked it up very quickly and I read books all the time when I was a kid. I don't remember anyone else in my family being big readers, but it was just something I intrinsically enjoyed. I've always been a fast reader. Does anyone remember those reading projectors that teachers used to use to increase students' reading speed? I looked it up and they're called tachistoscopic projectors, and they would show one or a few words on the screen at once, and then the words would move along fast or slow depending on the speed that the projector was set at, and the teacher could set the speed so you'd have to read faster. And I loved that thing. I know a lot of people who hated it, but I really loved it. I guess I really liked the challenge and I was good at it. So anyway, I've always been an avid reader since early childhood. All right, the next question is, how often do you read? Well, besides reading textbooks, which I'm not counting for these questions, for fun reading, I've been mostly listening to audiobooks for the past 10 years. I have a subscription to Audible, and I always have an audiobook downloaded on my phone. I love audiobooks because I can listen when I'm in the car and when I'm doing other things like knitting or cleaning the house. I would say that most days I listen to an audiobook for maybe an hour. All right, the next question is, what audiobook are you currently listening to? And that is Gateway to the Moon by Mary Morris. This is a new book that just came out last month. And question number 4 is it a good book? Yes, I'm really enjoying it. It's a historical fiction novel about the crypto Jews who escaped the Spanish Inquisition and settled hundreds of years ago in the American Southwest. It's kind of an obscure part of American history. This novel covers a lot of history I didn't know much about, and that's my favorite kind of book, one that teaches me something through a great story. I'll probably do a book review of it here when I'm done with it. Let me know if you'd be interested in hearing more about it. Let me know in the comment section. Okay, question number 5 is, what was the last bad book you read? And my answer, well, if I don't like a book, I don't finish reading it. I used to think that I was sort of obligated to finish every book until one day I realized why. So ever since then, I give the book a fair shot. If I can't get into it in the first chapter, I don't force it. So I haven't read any bad books to the end for a long time. But probably the last book I stopped reading fairly quickly was A Man Called Uwe by Frederick Bachman. I know that people love this book, and some of my friends said I need to keep reading it, but I couldn't. Grumpy old man, bleak, pessimistic, despair. I just couldn't get into that. Sometimes I think that whether you like a book or hate it partly depends on where you are at the moment. Sometimes you're just ready to hear things and are interested in it, and sometimes you're just not in the mood for it. So this book I returned. And that's one of the things I love about Audible. If you really hate a book, you can return it. Now, I don't do it a lot, but I have taken advantage of that return policy several times. And it's nice because then you don't feel like you've wasted your money and can use your credit for another book that you would enjoy. So yeah, I didn't really enjoy A Man Called Uwe, even though a lot of other people have. Okay, number 6, what is a popular book or series that you have no interest in reading? Here's another one. I know I'm alone in this opinion, but it's Outlander. This series seems like everything I would normally be interested in, the history, the medical science, but I tried to read a couple of books in this series and just could not do it. I did not like the time travel, and I'm not a big fan of romance novels. And obviously this series is all about time travel and romance. So those two qualities overshadowed the interesting history and science aspects and were just deal breakers for me, I guess. Number 7, what is a movie or TV adaptation of a book that you like more than the book? For this, I would have to say Harry Potter series. I read the first book back when it was originally released, and again, this is not popular. I know I'm the only one, but I started to read the first book because I never finished it. I really didn't like it. I felt like I could not identify with any characters in the book, so I put it down and that was it. But later on, when the movies came out, I did watch them and I really enjoyed them. So that was maybe the only time I didn't like a book, but I did like the movies made from the series. All right, question number 8. What is the worst movie or TV adaptation of a book that you've read? There are a lot, and that's why I rarely go to movies or watch TV based on books that I've read. But there is one fresh in my mind because this movie just came out maybe last month, and that is Ready Player One. This book is by Ernest Cline and was published in 2011. It is a fantasy sci-fi book set in the year 2044, and it's about a virtual reality game. Now, I have never played a video game in my life. Maybe Pong when it first came out. Anyway, this would not normally be the kind of book I would gravitate toward. But it was recommended to me by my friend Anne, and she said that she and her husband had listened to the audiobook on a road trip and loved it. So that's what made me pick it up. What I loved was that it was filled with 1980s pop culture, movies, fashion, and the history of computers and video games. I mean, Who doesn't remember their first desktop computer with the giant monitor, a 20 megabyte hard drive, and the huge floppy disks? Well, this book has tons of references to this kind of thing, which was really fun and appealing. And then the virtual reality world that is a big part of this book also makes you think about the direction that we're going with technology and maybe some potential new uses for it. Like, what if kids went to school in this virtual world? Or what if people had jobs in this virtual world? And how would living most of the day in this virtual world affect us in the real world? Plus, the audiobook was read by Will Wheaton, and he was fabulous. So I really enjoyed this book and could not wait to see the movie. And it was directed by the great Steven Spielberg, so I was excited to see how a lot of the scenes from the book would play out in the movie. I mean, special effects in movies today are so good that I thought parts of this book were going to be amazing on the screen. But the movie was a total dud. I hated it. This movie was so far from the book that I feel like the only thing that was the same were the characters. The storyline was different. The characters did completely different things than they did in the book. The ending was awful. During the movie, I kept turning to my husband and saying, "That's not what happened." Now, maybe if you didn't read the book, you would enjoy the movie because it's probably fine as a standalone movie. My husband thought it was pretty good, probably except for me complaining the whole time. But if you're like me and you read the book and were thinking it would translate beautifully into a special effects action movie, you'll probably be disappointed. Don't get me wrong, there were special effects and there was action, but it was all rewritten into a different story than the book was. It's not like they just cut a few things and changed a few things to make it fit into a 2-hour movie. They completely revamped the story, and I thought it was terrible. So that's my long-winded answer. Okay, question number 9. What is your favorite book genre? This is not going to be surprising to anyone who's watched my previous videos, but right now I'm really into historical fiction. I like reading novels about people and time periods I don't know much about. And I think it's a lot more meaningful and memorable to learn about someone or something when it's a novel based on true events or real people. So you get a sense of the context and what was going on in the world or a particular region of the world at that time. So did this particular dialogue happen? Probably not. But as long as the main themes are based in reality, that poetic license makes the person or event more authentic and memorable to me. Okay, number 10. What is a popular book genre that you never reach for? Well, even though historical fiction is my favorite, I do read a lot of different genres, but I'd have to say that the type of book that I usually avoid would have to be romance novels. I've definitely read my share of romance novels over the years, so I feel like I have a good handle on what they're about. And in my humble opinion, they are usually very cliche and formulaic. I mean, not that other books can't be cliche and formulaic, but despite the name romance, I don't feel that they are really about love and relationships. They're way too sexualized. The characters are fixated on appearance. The sex scenes are terribly written with dreadful metaphors, and there's always a happy ending. Now, my preference, and this is what I always say, I like wholesome stories that are G-rated or maybe PG. I also appreciate realistic endings rather than what is anticipated or supposed to happen. Sometimes life hands out challenges and things don't end up perfectly, and I'd rather read about that than some expectation of living happily ever after. Okay, question number 11. What book has influenced you the most? Well, I feel like I'm influenced by every book in some way, so there are a lot of books that I could answer this question with. But I guess one that sticks out in my mind is We the Living by Ayn Rand. It was her first novel, and it's probably her least well-known. It is considered to be semi-autobiographical because she was born in Russia and experienced the revolution, eventually coming to the United States in 1926. We the Living was published 10 years later, and it's about life in the Soviet Union right after the revolution. Now, the plot is fiction, but the context and background is what was really happening at the time. And this book takes readers on an intimate journey into the lives of many characters who are struggling to live under the Soviet system. Reading this book was the first time I'd ever seen what life was really like under communism. It was my first realistic glance at what went on behind the Iron Curtain and why people risked life and limb to get away from the oppressive dictatorships that were dominating Eastern Europe at the time. And that was when I was growing up. So that's just a book that has just stuck with me for many, many years. Question number 12 is, which fictional character do you wish you were more like? And this is an easy one for me because I think about it every time I read a book in this series. I wish I could be more like Precious Ramotswe, the lead character in the #1 Ladies Detective Agency books by Alexander McCall Smith. I just love her. She is such a likable person who is clever, patient, empathic, and conscientious. She's got a relaxed yet common sense approach to problem solving. I especially admire her poise and the peaceful way she interacts with people, even those who are rude to her. And every time I read one of the books in this series, I try to think about how I can incorporate her personality into my own. So, yeah, Precious Ramotswe is one of my favorite book characters that I would like to channel. All right, the next question is, what book have you reread the most? And it's probably Dracula. I don't read a lot of horror novels, but I got interested in Dracula about 7 years ago when Heather from the Craft Lit podcast featured the book Dracula on her show, and she was reading it a few chapters at a time for something like 12 weeks. Well, after that first episode where I listened to the first few chapters, I knew I could not wait the 12 weeks to finish the book. So I went over to Audible and got it on Audible and listened to it myself. It's creepy, but I didn't think it was as scary as I expected it to be. I do think it's interesting that Bram Stoker spends little time focusing on the vampire, and almost the entire main plot centers on the terrified vampire hunters who want to preserve themselves from becoming vampires. But then it's unclear what exactly is so terrible about becoming a vampire. I mean, you get to live forever, you get to change your shape and fly around the sky whenever you want, you get to do a lot of cool things. It sounds pretty good, except that you're evil. Anyway, in this book, I also enjoyed the descriptions of the places, especially Transylvania, the Carpathian Mountains, and the Borgo Pass that is featured in the first section of the book. A few years ago, I traveled to Romania and had the opportunity to see all these places, and I was actually listening to the first part of Dracula as we were driving through the mountain pass. And from the book, you get this picture in your head that it looks something like this, sinister and dark with all these craggy peaks. But in reality, it looks like this. More like rolling hills, small farms, and green countryside. So that was fun to see. And then I did a lot of research on Bram Stoker and his inspiration for this book, which I found really interesting. So I've been rereading Dracula almost every October for the past 7 years, and I was thinking that maybe this October, if I read it again, I'll do a video reviewing Dracula and the scholarly research on the book's background. Let me know down below if you'd be interested in seeing that. Okay, the next question is, what book made you cry recently? And I think the most recent book that made me cry was Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. I reviewed this book in one of my videos last year, and I'll link to that in the information box below. But Lisa Wingate was inspired to write this novel after learning about the true story of Georgia Tann and the Tennessee Children's Home Society. This organization kidnapped thousands of children from poor families to sell for adoption on the black market, mainly to wealthy families. While waiting to be adopted, the children were badly mistreated. So this is a novel about a fictitious family torn apart when their children were basically captured and taken to an orphanage and then sold for adoption to people who could pay the outrageous fee. It is a heart-wrenching story that is totally worth reading. I thought it was a fabulous book. Okay, and lastly, for the lightning round, you're supposed to list your favorite book in each of these categories. So the first category is fantasy. My favorite book in the fantasy category is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Science fiction. In the science fiction category, my favorite book is The Martian by Andy Weir. In suspense, my favorite suspense book is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. In literary fiction, my favorite book is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. For biography, my favorite book is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. And in the humor category, my favorite book is The Sweet Potato Queen's Big Ass Novel by Jill Connor Brown. For historical fiction, I can't pick one. There's too many. Sorry. And for my favorite series, I would say it's a tie between the Flavia de Luce series by Alan Bradley and the Royal Spinous series by Rhys Bowen. So that's it for my book Q&A. I hope you've enjoyed getting to know my reading history and preferences in this first U University ancillary video. And now it's your turn to tell me your answers to these questions. And of course, you don't have to answer all of them, but if you would, share your answers to any of the questions that you want. I'm really eager to hear about what books you've read and which ones you've liked and dislikes and which books you would recommend to me. I hope to get some new reading suggestions from you. And also let me know if you want me to do a book review on any of the books I mentioned in this video. Leave your comments, questions, and requests down in the comment section below. And I will leave links to all the books that I talked about in the information box right underneath this video. Just click on Show More to open up the box and you'll see all the links there. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, and I'll see you in my next video. And until then, remember to stay smart and have a sparkly week.